3 weeks now of the season and about 20 games to go. So let's start with your week. It's been kind of an up and down week, Jahmai, with the way the Red Sox had played, the 5-game losing streak, and then winning the first couple of games of this series, the return of Trevor Story. So there's been some up and down. What's it been like for you?
Yeah, it's been up and down, to steal your word. I mean, it's not much consistency to it. And then, obviously, the Red Sox going to Detroit, disappointing road trip, then going to New York, getting swept by the Mets. Not what you want or what you expect, but especially at this stage in the year. I mean, it's just the final month of the season. You really want to, try and get some stability as it relates to every aspect of the game. But they haven't been able to receive that. So I feel like it's up and down, man. And I still, perpetually glass half full guy. So I'm still trying to maintain some positivity about the whole thing. But it was looking bleak there for a moment after that Met sweep. That's for sure. But I feel like the hope is brought back into the mix with the Chicago White Sox being here in town. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it is amazing how quickly things can turn too, right? Because, you go into the series against the White Sox. The Red Sox are 5.5 games back. They got 2 teams in front of them in the wild card standings. And you're thinking, man, this is not good. But to your point, you're bringing, the White Sox, who are on track to be the worst team in the modern era of Major League Baseball. And then you got teams around you that are losing, namely the Twins and the Royals playing that series in Kansas City. The Twins losing the first 2 games of the series. And all of a sudden, you go from 5.5 out to 4 out as we record this. So you gain a game and a half in 2 days. It's how quickly things can turn. But, let's go back to the road trip, Jahmai. And, the Red Sox obviously have had a rough second half of the year. And, they've had some good moments, the good moments being, splitting the series with the Orioles, winning the series over the Astros in that road trip, finishing with a winning road trip. And so you're feeling pretty good about things despite the fact that they hadn't played their best baseball in the second half. Then they come back to Fenway Park where they just haven't played well over the last few years now here at the ballpark. They lose that series to the Diamondbacks. They get swept. The Blue Jays come in for 5. They lose 2 out of 5 there. And then you go on this road trip. You win the first game of the series against the Tigers. Then you lose 5 straight. And, there was somebody who described it, and I can't remember, if it was from multiple reporters or one reporter talking about it being like a funeral inside the Red Sox clubhouse.
It was multiple reporters, but I think the story you're referring to was Peter Abraham, who said it was like a funeral, which, I concur being inside the clubhouse. It certainly felt like somebody had died. And when I talk about somebody, I mean the season.
Right. And so I guess my question to you is that, is that, baseball's such a long season, man, and they go through losing streaks, and then, you just can't focus on the big picture. You just have to go day by day. But yeah, after that loss, is that the worst it's felt in the clubhouse all season long?
I would have to agree with that statement, and partly because now, you can't see the forest between the trees when you start out a season in April. But when you're in September, you're running out of days, you're running out of games. You start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, whether that's leading you to a postseason or whether you're going to be for another year sitting on the outside looking in. So to go into that week and not play as well as you had hoped and not be able to find your offense, the thing that has pretty much carried you to this point in the year, that was disappointing. And then walking into that clubhouse, I'm seeing guys 10 minutes, 15 minutes after the game still in uniform. Rafael Devers being one of those players, just staring off into the abyss. And, it's uncharacteristic of him, which is why, post-game, just to set the scene for people, it's usually a free-for-all. Like, you grab who you want, you ask, if they're available to you in that moment, and you try to see if they have time, obviously, understanding, which is why there's a 10-minute cool-off period for people to kind of get their emotions and their thoughts in check. But for him, on a daily basis, he's usually the first guy to leave the clubhouse or be dressed. He might, later on or to this point in the year, he's getting a lot more treatment on those shoulders that has been ailing him. But for the most part, he's in and out pretty efficiently and pretty quickly, and he's on his way home. So for him to still be in full uniform that far after the final pitch was thrown was uncharacteristic of him. So again, usually you try to just go up to the player and say, hey, you got a minute to talk to us. And that's the approach I usually take. But because he was sitting there, I decided that, I was going to ask the public relations staff, if they can grab him too, understanding that he also needs an interpreter. Or that's how he likes to communicate his thoughts at this point. So I asked, and they were like, all right, let's go see if he has a moment. So we're getting ready to walk over to talk to Rafi. And then the public relations staff was like, you know what? I think we should wait, actually. So I was like, okay, whatever you think is best. And then we kind of go back to standing in the middle of the clubhouse waiting to see what's going on. So this lasted for about 30 minutes. He sat there with the bat in his hand, with his thoughts kind of going through, seemingly playing over the game that just happened, because he had been struggling to this point still, finally starting to get out of that funk. And then he gets up, goes and leaves because he's getting drug tested. So about 45 minutes has passed by, finally comes back, starts to gather his stuff to take a shower finally. So now about an hour has passed. And now I'm looking at the bus times. It's like 10:30 first bus, 11 o'clock second bus. So he's already missed that first bus. So it's like 10:40 at night now. And he finally gets out the shower, gets dressed, and he leaves again, comes back. And then he's like, I don't have time. I got to go. He says that in Spanish. So then I'm like, are we doing this? Are we not? So then he leaves, obviously frustrated with what's going on. But I think fans and people alike, they'd like to hear from him, not because he's just a star, but also because he represents a lot of the leadership, or that people probably assume that he represents a lot of leadership on this team. We've understand over the last few years that he's a quiet leader, leads by example. But I think in instances like this, where we've seen in the past, guys like Xander Bogaerts, Mookie Betts, David Ortiz, people of that nature who kind of led a clubhouse or kind of been that person that is looked to, they've spoken up in those moments and, said, even if it's at the very least, hey, we got to play better. It starts with me. It's something we need to do. I still believe in this team. Those words might ring hollow to some people, but I think it's important to hear that person step up. So for him to kind of blow us off like that it just kind of spoke to, maybe because, again, haven't spoken to him about this, but it spoke to maybe the emotions that he was feeling in that moment and kind of where he thought the season was leading and, trying to find answers in search of how to turn things around. So to get back to the original point, I know a very long-winded answer, as always, on the Extra Time podcast, which is why we have extra time for moments like this. But, certainly felt like that was probably one of the tougher losses of the year.
Yeah, that's really insightful, though, about Rafael Devers, because it was a big story. And I remember when he signed his big deal, I think the questions were, hey, he hasn't really been in front of the cameras much in the past. He hasn't really demonstrated the leaders of the qualities of a quote unquote vocal type guy. Will this contract change that? And the answer to that question was no. And I think it's been pretty consistent since then, right? He's not a vocal leader. He goes about his business. He takes care of his own business, and he leads by posting up every day, right? Because we were talking to Pete Fatsi on the 310 to Left podcast about Rafi and about his struggles at the plate, and a lot of that is probably related to the injuries that he's dealing with, but also, the fact that, hey, like after that loss, reporters were waiting to talk to him. He ended up leaving and not talking to reporters. That obviously gained a lot of attention, but Pete Fatsi had basically said, look, this guy posts up every day. He's a warrior. He's tough, and that's how he leads. And I think, that's true, but I also think that he's learning that he has to sort of be in front of the cameras, during times like these, and he might not be the best, the most vocal leader, but at the end of the day, he's their best player, right? And I know Jarren Duran is emerging, but, for a long period of time, Rafael Devers has been the best player on the Red Sox, and in good times and in bad times, the fans want to hear from somebody. They want accountability, Yeah. And I think, and the guys that you mentioned, Xander, Mookie, and some of the others, Ortiz back in the day, those guys, it's not like those guys haven't had their moments where they've said, no, I'm not talking, right? I mean,
Right.
Of course they have. And I think we just remember the times that they talked, after a tough loss because they did it pretty often. But there were also times where they said no. And I think that we're looking at Rafi and we're saying, well, he didn't talk. And we're thinking, well, he hasn't talked much. And I think that's why it was the focus. It's because he hasn't talked a lot in the past. Those other guys have talked a lot in the past. Rafi hasn't. And then when he doesn't during a time like this, I think
I'm on live with a podcast.
Hey, tell your fans to pipe down, okay? I mean, we got some work to do over here. My God.
Cutter Crawford, man. Cutter Crawford chirping me right now. Tell him
Does he want to come on? Tell me. Come on.
We'll get you on as a guest to the Extra Time podcast here pretty soon. We'll get you on as a guest to the Extra Time podcast with Jahmai Webster, Sophia Yerkevich, Adam Peller. He said if I got any extra time.
Nice. Very well done. Very well done.
Thanks, Cutter.
Very well done. Thanks, Cutter. I appreciate it. I always love guest appearances.
Yeah, it's fantastic, man. That's amazing.
But anyway, that was just to sort of put a bow on the Rafael Devers situation.
Yeah, and actually, I want to bring up one other point, if I may, actually, and it's not just in the times of when things are down that Rafael Devers doesn't speak. He's actually maintained pretty consistently over the course of this year, even when he's done great. I mean, there's times where he was going through this year earlier in the season where he had the games of consecutive home runs, where he was continuing to rewrite the history books for Red Sox hitters. And I think it was about the sixth game, and he accomplished the goal, and he turned down a walk-off interview on the field. He said it wasn't my day, and I actually had a conversation with him about this, and I was like, Rafi, man, what's going on? People want to hear from you. They want to hear what you have to say about, what was going through your mind, what was your thought process, what was your approach against these pitchers facing this history. I said, why are you saying no to me outside on the field? And he's like, some days I just don't feel like it. Some days I feel like it's my day, and other days I feel like it's not. And I'm like, so what describes it as your day then? If you hit a walk-off? He's like, maybe.